The Basin Between Two Ranches. Episode 1, The Man from the Sea. The wind carried dust across the empty street when Ethan Cole rode into Redstone Valley. He had traveled a long way to reach this place. For many years, Ethan had worked as a sea captain. He had sailed across cold oceans and visited distant ports. He had seen great storms and quiet nights under the stars. But the sea was now behind him. This time he had come west for a different reason. He had come for a woman. Her name was Clara Whitmore. Clara was the daughter of Colonel Thomas Whitmore, the owner of the largest ranch in the valley. People called it the Ladder Ranch. Hundreds of cattle moved across its hills like a slow black river. Clara welcomed Ethan warmly when he arrived. She was happy to see him again, but something about the valley felt uneasy. Men in the town watched Ethan carefully. Conversations in the saloon grew quiet when he entered. Redstone Valley had an old problem. Two powerful ranch families lived there, the Whitmores and the Brennans. For many years, the two families had been enemies. Their feud had grown slowly, season after season, until it became part of life in the valley. And the reason for all of it was simple: water. During the dry months, the streams disappeared and the ground cracked under the sun. There was only one reliable place where cattle could drink, a muddy stretch of land called Dry Creek Basin. Both ranches believed the land belonged to them. Neither side was willing to share, and over the years, men had already been hurt, and some had died because of it. Ethan had just arrived in the valley, but he had unknowingly ridden straight into the middle of a long and bitter war. Episode 2, The Drunken Cowboys. On Ethan's first evening in town, Clara introduced him to one of her friends. Her name was Elena Morales. Elena worked as the town's school teacher. She was quiet and thoughtful, and she listened more than she spoke. The three of them walked slowly along the wooden boardwalk in front of the shops. The sun was setting and the street was beginning to fill with people leaving work. Suddenly, loud laughter came from the saloon. A group of cowboys stepped outside. They had clearly been drinking for some time. Their leader was a tall young man with a hard expression. His name was Jake Brennan. Clara's smile disappeared when she saw him. Jake Brennan was the son of Samuel Brennan, the man who owned the rival ranch across the valley. Jake noticed Ethan immediately. "So this is the sailor," he said with a crooked smile. He walked closer and pushed Ethan hard in the chest. "Let's see if a sea captain can fight." The other cowboys laughed loudly. People nearby stopped walking and began watching the scene. Clara looked worried. She knew Jake Brennan enjoyed trouble. For a moment, Ethan said nothing. Then he simply brushed the dust from his coat. "I've seen worse things at sea," he said calmly. "They're just drunk men." The laughter stopped. Jake stared at him, unsure how to respond. Finally, he laughed again, but there was anger in it. "Maybe we'll test that another day," he said. The cowboys returned to the saloon. The street slowly came back to life. But Clara remained quiet as they walked. Jake Brennan had not started a fight yet. And in Redstone Valley, trouble rarely stayed away for long. Episode 3, The Wild Horse. The next morning, Ethan woke early at the Ladder Ranch. The sun had just risen over the hills and the ranch was already alive with work. Cowboys rode out to check the cattle, while others repaired fences or prepared wagons for the day. Luke Carter, the ranch foreman, watched Ethan carefully. Luke had worked for Colonel Whitmore for many years. He respected strength and courage, and he did not trust men who avoided fights. To him, Ethan looked more like a gentleman than a rancher. So he decided to test him. Later that morning, Luke led Ethan to the horse corral. Several ranch hands followed them, curious to see what would happen. Inside the corral stood a large black stallion. The horse moved nervously, stamping its hooves and shaking. Its head, its eyes were wild. "That horse is called Thunder," Luke said loudly so everyone could hear. "No man on this ranch has ever ridden him." A few cowboys laughed. They were certain the stranger from the sea would refuse. But Ethan quietly climbed over the fence. He walked slowly toward the horse and took the reins. For a moment, Thunder stood still. Then the stallion exploded with energy. The horse bucked violently and threw Ethan into the dirt. Laughter broke out along the fence. Ethan stood up, brushed the dust from his coat, and tried again. The second fall was even harder. Then the third. Each time, the cowboys laughed louder. But Ethan kept climbing back onto the horse. Finally, Thunder burst forward and ran across the open field. The stallion twisted and kicked wildly, trying to throw its rider. But this time, Ethan stayed in the saddle. For several long moments, horse and rider fought for control. Then, slowly, thunder began to calm. When Ethan finally guided the horse back to the corral, the laughter had disappeared. The cowboys stood quietly along the fence. No one said a word. Luke Carter watched him carefully. The stranger from the sea was not the man he had expected, and Luke suddenly realized something. Ethan Cole might be far more dangerous than he looked. Episode 4, The Dinner. That evening, Colonel Whitmore held a dinner at the ranch house to welcome Ethan. Long tables were set inside the large dining room. Plates of food covered the table, and bottles of whiskey moved from hand to hand. Cowboys laughed loudly after a long day of work. A man in the corner played a fiddle, and the sound of music filled the room. For a while, the ranch felt peaceful. Ethan sat beside Clara while the colonel spoke proudly about the future of the latter ranch. Outside the windows, the night was quiet. Then suddenly the front doors burst open. The music stopped at once. Every head in the room turned toward the entrance. A tall man stood in the doorway. Dust covered his coat and a rifle rested in his hands. It was Samuel Brennan. The room grew completely silent. Colonel Whitmore slowly stood up from his chair. The two men stared at each other across the long table. For many years they had been enemies. "Good evening, Colonel," Brennan said. His voice was calm, but there was anger behind it. Whitmore did not smile. "What do you want, Brennan?" Brennan stepped into the room. "Your men rode onto my land this morning," he said. "They frightened my people and damaged my water tanks." Several cowboys shifted in their chairs. Whitmore's face hardened. "No one from my ranch did that." Brennan laughed quietly. "You expect me to believe that?" For a moment, it seemed the entire room might explode. Cowboys slowly moved their hands closer to their guns. Even the fiddle player had stopped breathing. Ethan watched silently from his chair. He could feel how deep the hatred between the two men had grown. Finally, Brennan lowered his rifle. "This isn't finished," he said. Then he turned and walked out into the night. The door closed behind him. But the music did not start again. Everyone in the room understood the same thing. The old feud between the ranches was about to become much worse. Episode 5, The Land with Water. The next morning, Ethan rode alone into the hills. He wanted to see Dry Creek Basin with his own eyes. The basin lay in a quiet part of the valley. The ground was dry and cracked, but a few muddy pools of water still remained. Ethan understood immediately why the two ranches fought over this place. In the dry season, cattle needed water more than anything else. Without water, a ranch could lose its entire herd. Ethan rode slowly around the basin. Old fence posts stood along the edge of the land. Nearby, he saw the remains of a small house and a broken barn. It looked like a ranch that had been abandoned many years ago, but something about the place puzzled him. The land did not belong to the Whitmores, and it did not belong to the Brennans either. Later that afternoon, Ethan went to the small schoolhouse in town. Elena Morales was finishing her lessons for the day when he arrived. "I have a question about Dry Creek Basin," Ethan said. Elena looked up with surprise. "You rode out there?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "I was trying to understand why both ranches claim it." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke slowly. "That land is mine," she said. "My parents built a small ranch there many years ago." She looked toward the distant hills. "The basin sits between the Whitmore Ranch and the Brennan Ranch," she said. "In dry months, it's the closest water for both herds. My parents allowed both ranches to water their cattle there. For many years, it kept the peace in the valley. After her parents died, Elena moved into town and became a school teacher. The old ranch slowly fell apart, but she never sold the land. If I sold it to the Whitmores, she said quietly, the Brennans would lose the water. And if I sold it to the Brennans, the Whitmores would lose it. So I kept it. That way both ranches can still water their cattle. Ethan thought about this carefully. Then he made her an offer. I'd like to buy the basin, he said. Elena looked surprised. Why? So the fighting can stop, Ethan replied. His plan was simple. Both ranches would be allowed to bring their cattle there. For a long moment, Elena said nothing. Then she gave a small, thoughtful smile. Maybe the valley needs someone who thinks that way, she said. And she agreed to sell the land. Ethan believed he had just found a way to end the valley's long feud. Episode 6, The Broken Engagement. That evening, Ethan returned to the latter ranch. The sun was already low behind the hills, and the long shadows of the barns stretched across the ground. He found Clara walking slowly along the fence near the house. She smiled when she saw him. "You were gone all day," she said. "I rode to Dry Creek Basin," Ethan replied. Clara nodded slightly. "That old place again?" "Yes," Ethan said. "There's something you should know." They walked together toward the edge of the field. In the distance, cattle were moving slowly across the dry grass. "Elena Morales still owns the Basin," Ethan said. Clara shrugged. "Yes, her family built a ranch there years ago." Clara looked at him. "So why were you there all day?" Ethan took a slow breath. "I bought the Basin," he said. "You bought it?" She looked surprised. "Yes. My father tried hard to buy that land. Elena refused to sell it. So that land belongs to us now." "My father must be very proud of you." "I bought it for stop the fight between two ranches." Ethan pointed toward the distant hills. "Both ranches need that water," he said. "If one side controls it, the other side will fight forever. So I bought it." Clara's expression slowly hardened. "And what exactly do you plan to do with it?" "Both ranches can still bring their cattle there," Ethan said. "No ranch will control the water." Clara stared at him in disbelief. "You're giving the Brennans access to our water?" "It was never your family's water," Ethan said quietly. "It belonged to Elena." "That doesn't matter," Clara replied. "They are our enemies." Ethan shook his head. "They don't have to be." Clara's voice grew colder. "You came here to marry me," she said. "But you don't understand my family." Ethan did not answer. For a long moment they stood there in silence. Finally, Clara turned away. "If you believe the Brennans deserve the same water as us," she said, "then maybe you don't belong here." The next morning, Ethan packed his belongings. The latter ranch was Clara's home. It had never truly been his. Before the sun rose over the valley, he rode away from the ranch house. Behind him, the long feud of Redstone Valley was still burning. Episode 7, Trouble at Dry Creek Basin. 2 days after Ethan bought Dry Creek Basin, the valley began to change. Early one morning, Elena Morales rode out toward the basin. For many years, the land had belonged to her family. Now it belonged to Ethan, but the water was still meant to serve both ranches. When she reached the basin, she saw several riders already there. They were men from the Brennan Ranch. The riders had pulled down the old fence posts around the land. Broken wood lay scattered across the dry ground. Near the muddy pools of water, Jake Brennan was hammering a wooden sign into the soil. Elena rode closer. The words on the sign were easy to read. "Brennan cattle only." Jake noticed her watching. "Morning school teacher," he said with a grin. "That land doesn't belong to Brennan." Elena replied calmly. Jake shrugged. "Maybe not," he said. "But nobody here is going to stop us." Elena studied him for a moment. Then she turned her horse and rode back toward town. She found Ethan. "The Brennans were at the basin this morning," she told him. Within minutes, they were riding across the valley. When they reached Dry Creek Basin, the place was quiet again. The broken fence posts still lay in the dust. The wooden sign stood beside the water. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They both understood what it meant. And the long fight in the valley was about to begin again. Episode 8, The Kidnapping. Samuel Brennan did not believe Ethan's story. To the people of Redstone Valley, the plan sounded fair. Ethan Cole had bought Dry Creek Basin, and both ranches would still be allowed to water their cattle there. But Brennan saw something else. Ethan was engaged to Clara Whitmore. If Ethan owned the basin, then the Whitmore family would control the water without ever winning it in a fight. To Brennan, the meaning was clear. It was a trick. "The Whitmores finally found a clever way to take the basin," he said to his riders. "A stranger buys the land, and suddenly they decide who drinks and who doesn't." Jake mentioned Elena Morales. "She sold him the land," Jake said. Brennan's eyes hardened. "Then she helped them do it." In his mind, the three of them had planned everything together. Whitmore, Ethan, and Elena. If he wanted the truth, he would start with her. The next morning, Elena finished her lessons at the small schoolhouse. She stepped outside into the warm afternoon light. Before she reached the stable behind the building, several riders appeared at the end of the street. Jake Brennan rode at their head. "Elena Morales," he said. "My father wants to speak with you." The tone of his voice made it clear she had no choice. They took her horse and rode south, toward the dry hills beyond the valley. Episode 9, The Canyon. News travels quickly in a small town. By late afternoon, Ethan heard what had happened. Jake Brennan had taken Elena Morales and headed south toward the dry hills. Ethan did not wait. He saddled his horse and rode out of Redstone Valley at once. The narrow canyon lay several miles away, hidden among the rocks and dust. If Brennan believed Elena had helped with the deal, she could be in serious danger. Not long after Ethan left town, another rider arrived at the Whitmore Ranch. The man carried a message from the Brennans. Samuel Brennan was waiting in the canyon. He said Whitmore had tried to steal the Basin through a trick. Colonel Whitmore's face grew cold when he heard the accusation. "I never hid behind another man to take what I wanted," he said. Without another word, he saddled his horse and rode south. The canyon was quiet when Ethan arrived. High walls of red stone rose on both sides. Elena sat on a horse near the center of the narrow valley. Several riders from the Brennan ranch watched her closely. Samuel Brennan stood nearby, holding the reins of his horse. When Ethan rode in, Brennan looked at him with open anger. "So the sailor finally arrived," Brennan said. "Where is Whitmore?" Before Ethan could answer, the sound of another horse echoed through the canyon. Colonel Whitmore rode slowly between the rocks and stopped a short distance away. For a moment, no one spoke. Brennan looked from Whitmore to Ethan. "You thought you could trick me," he said. "A stranger buys the Basin, and suddenly the Whitmores control the water." Whitmore's eyes hardened. "I never asked that man to buy anything for me." "But you benefit from it," Brennan replied. "And now you pretend to know nothing." The two old ranchers faced each other across the dusty ground. Years of anger stood between them. Ethan stepped forward. "This doesn't have to end like this," he said. "You can both still water your cattle at the Basin. No one has to fight for it anymore." But neither man listened. Both had lived too long with hatred in their hearts. Samuel Brennan slowly raised his rifle. Whitmore lifted his own weapon at the same moment. Two shots echoed across the canyon. The sound rolled against the stone walls like thunder. When the dust settled, both men were lying on the ground. Neither of them moved. The long fight over water had finally come to an end. Episode 10, Dry Creek Basin. After the shooting in the canyon, the long feud in Redstone Valley finally ended. Samuel Brennan and Colonel Whitmore were buried on the same windy hill above the valley. For many years, their names had divided the land between them. Now the valley belonged to neither man. Spring returned slowly. Grass began to grow across the hills, and cattle once again moved through the open range. At Dry Creek Basin, the muddy pools remained between the two ranches. Just as they always had, herds from both sides came down the slope to drink. No riders watched the water. One evening, Ethan rode out to the Basin. The sun was sinking behind the western hills, and the valley was quiet. He sat in the saddle for a while, watching the cattle gather around the water. After some time, he heard another horse coming along the narrow trail from town. Elena Morales rode down the path and stopped beside him. She looked out across the Basin where the cattle were drinking. "This place used to cause so much trouble," she said. Ethan watched the water ripple around the animals' hooves. It didn't have to. The sun slipped lower behind the hills. Warm light spread across the quiet valley. Elena turned her horse slightly toward him. "Are you planning to stay here?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "I think I will." Elena looked across the Basin once more. "Good," she said softly. Then she guided her horse forward along the edge of the water. Ethan followed beside her. The two horses walked slowly through the evening light, while the cattle from both ranches drank quietly at Dry Creek Basin.